5:14 a.m. November 8th, 2026. Nogales, Arizona. A massive 18-wheeler Freightliner Cascadia sat idling in the secondary inspection bay at the CBP port of entry. Its diesel engine vibrated against the cold morning air, a low rumble bouncing off the concrete barriers, waiting for clearance. The driver, a 44-year-old commercial operator with a clean commercial driver's license, sat in the cab, sipping convenience store coffee. His electronic logging device showed he had been on the road for barely 2 hours, having picked up his trailer in a secure lot just south of the border. The manifest, logged digitally into the automated commercial environment, declared exactly 24 pallets of bulk commercial textiles. A routine gamma ray scan had already been completed by the primary inspection crew, showing nothing but dense, uniform blocks of fabric. But the numbers on the scale did not match the numbers on the screen. 38 minutes. That is how long it took for the entire operation to unravel. By 5:52 a.m., the Freightliner was locked down, the driver was detained in a CBP holding facility, and a federal case file was officially opened. This is the story of Operation Glasshouse, the largest domestic identity fraud and narco-finance prosecution in a decade. It started because a single cargo clerk noticed a number that did not add up, and it ended with 14 SWAT teams breaching doors across 3 states. This is how it happened. To understand what happened next, you need to understand the exact sequence of events at the border. CBP officer Daniel Vega, 9 years on the force, was working the primary inspection lane. The manifest declared a gross vehicle weight of 48,000 pounds. Vega glanced at the weighbridge scale readout on his monitor. The digital display flashed 41,200 pounds. Vega ran the numbers again. A standard pallet of bulk commercial textiles, specifically the woven polyester declared on the manifest, weighed approximately 1,150 pounds. 24 pallets should have come to roughly 27,600 pounds in cargo alone. Adding the standard tear weight of the pallets, the heavy-duty shrink wrap, and the structural steel bracing used for international transit, the math still only approached 30,000 pounds. Even accounting for the 18-wheeler's tractor and empty trailer weight, the declared gross vehicle weight of 48,000 pounds was a massive overstatement. But the scale reading of 41,200 pounds was a massive understatement. The reverse arithmetic was staggering. A discrepancy of over 6,800 pounds existed between the declared weight and the actual weight. 6,800 pounds of something that was definitely not cheap polyester fabric. Vega flagged the manifest. He applied a Form 5106 flag to the importer of record, a shell company registered in Delaware 3 weeks prior. He directed the Freightliner Cascadia into the secondary inspection bay. At 5:14 a.m., he ordered a physical inspection of the cargo. CBP agricultural technicians began cutting the heavy-duty shrink wrap. Pallets 1 through 23 were exactly what the manifest said they were: cheap, tightly rolled bolts of neon-colored polyester fabric. But when the technicians reached the 24th pallet, the weight anomaly became a physical reality. The pallet felt entirely wrong. It was too light to be fabric, but the structural bracing was reinforced with custom-milled steel plates to artificially inflate its mass. They cut open the 24th pallet. Inside, there was no fabric. There were 14 tightly shrink-wrapped cardboard boxes. Vega put on nitrile gloves and opened the first box. Inside were 6,200 blank Social Security cards, printed on official Treasury Department watermarked stock. In a second box, 1,400 physical Social Security cards belonging to real, living victims. And in a third box, 800 high-quality holographic overlay sheets used to forge driver's licenses and passports. Vega immediately contacted his supervisory entry officer. By 6:30 a.m., the cargo was secured in the CBP X-ray bay. By 8 a.m., the gamma-ray tomographic scan showed nested internal compartments inside the custom-milled steel plates of the 24th pallet, revealing hidden compartments that contained bundled US currency. The manifest was a cover. The shipment was a massive delivery for an identity fraud ring. The driver of the Freightliner, 44-year-old Dale Mercer, was immediately separated from his cargo and escorted to CBP secondary. He was placed in a sterile, windowless interview room. Mercer was a textbook example of a blind courier. He had been paid $12,000 in cash, nearly 4 times his standard rate, to drive a sealed trailer across the border. When HSI agents showed him the contents of the 24th pallet, Mercer suffered a panic attack. He was offered a federal cooperation agreement. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Mercer revealed the exact handoff protocol. He was supposed to park the truck at a specific truck stop on Interstate 10, leave the keys in a magnetic lockbox under the rear wheel well, and walk to a nearby diner. He never saw the people who picked up the trailer. This crucial detail confirmed that the syndicate operated with extreme compartmentalization. The discovery triggered a cascading federal response. The Nogales CBP port director contacted Homeland Security Investigations. By 10 a.m., HSI Special Agent Raymond Castillo, 21 years at the HSI Identity and Benefit Fraud Unit, was on the scene. Castillo had seen forged documents before, but he had never seen official Treasury Department watermarked blank Social Security cards outside of a federal printing facility. Castillo ran the importer of record through the Treasury Enforcement Communications System, known as TEX. The shell company, Desert Trade Logistics, LLC, had been created exactly 21 days prior to the shipment. Its registered agent was a virtual office suite in Wilmington, Delaware. The company had no web presence, no phone number, and no employees. Its only transaction was this single shipment of textiles. Castillo escalated the case. Within 72 hours, Joint Task Force Glasshouse was formally established. The lead agencies were the FBI and the HSI Identity and Benefit Fraud Unit, with crucial operational and financial support from the United States Secret Service and the Arizona Department of Public Safety. FBI Supervisory Special Agent Sarah Jenkins, 42, 15 years with the Organized Crime Division, was assigned as the Federal Task Force Director. Jenkins had spent her career dismantling cartel logistics networks. She understood one fundamental rule of federal investigations: the documents always lead. Jenkins and Castillo convened at the FBI field office in Phoenix. Their first objective was to trace the logistics chain backward. They pulled the bills of lading, the electronic logging device data from the freightliner, and the GPS history of the truck. The truck had originated from a warehouse in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, but the shipment had been brokered by an American logistics firm based in Tucson. The task force obtained a Title III wiretap warrant for the phone of the dispatcher at the Tucson logistics firm. The dispatcher was a 38-year-old American named Marcus Vance. Vance was a mid-level operator. He coordinated trucking routes for independent contractors. On paper, Vance was a legitimate freight broker, but the Title III wiretap revealed a different reality. Vance was communicating daily with a burner phone located in a wealthy suburb of Scottsdale, Arizona. The conversations were brief, heavily coded, and focused entirely on weight, dimensions, and arrival times. The task force needed to identify the owner of the burner phone. They used a Stingray device, a cell site simulator, to passively intercept the international mobile subscriber identity of the device. The device belonged to a man named Arthur Pendleton. Arthur Pendleton, 54 years old. Master's degree in international finance from the University of Chicago. Chief financial architect for a sophisticated narco-finance syndicate. Pendleton was not a typical cartel boss. He did not carry a weapon. He did not interact with street-level dealers. He was a white-collar architect of crime. Neighbors in Scottsdale described him as a quiet, polite financial consultant. He drove a silver Lexus LS 500. He paid his homeowners association dues early. He attended local charity galas. He tipped well at restaurants. He was, by all outward appearances, a successful private equity manager. Underneath the tailored suits and the private golf club memberships, Pendleton was the mastermind of a $112 million money laundering empire. His syndicate used stolen identities to create shell companies. These shell companies opened bank accounts across 4 states. Cartel drug proceeds, in the form of bulk cash, were smuggled across the border and deposited into these accounts in small, structured amounts to avoid detection. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Pendleton used the 6,200 blank Social Security cards to create synthetic identities. He paired these synthetic identities with real victims' data, creating a web of fictitious employees. The cartel cash was then laundered through shell company payrolls. Millions of dollars were moved through the financial system, disguised as legitimate wages. Taxes were withheld to make the transactions look entirely authentic, and the clean funds were withdrawn or wired to offshore accounts. I spent hours going through the court filings for this case, and one detail kept nagging me. Pendleton wasn't just stealing identities to open credit cards or take out loans, which is what we usually see. He was weaponizing the United States tax system. By filing legitimate W-2S and paying payroll taxes on behalf of fictitious workers, he made the laundered money look perfectly clean to the IRS and the banks. It was a level of patience and structural sophistication you almost never see in narco-finance. The financial pattern recognition software used by the Secret Service identified the scope of the network. Pendleton operated through 3 primary channels, utilizing 97 subordinate shell companies. Always the same 3 transaction patterns, always moving funds in sub-$10,000 increments. The money flowed through accounts in Arizona, California, Texas, and Nevada. In total, $112 million moved through this system in just 22 months. To understand the human impact of this scheme, you have to look at the victims. One of the 1,400 real Social Security cards recovered belonged to a 67-year-old retired schoolteacher from Eugene. Oregon. Because Pendleton's syndicate used her identity to create a fictitious payroll profile, the IRS flagged her legitimate pension as fraudulent income. Her bank accounts were frozen for 8 months. She couldn't pay her mortgage. She was forced to take out high-interest payday loans just to buy groceries, all while fighting a federal bureaucracy that insisted she was holding a ghost job in Phoenix. This was not a victimless crime. It was a systematic destruction of ordinary lives. The task force faced a critical obstacle. They had identified Pendleton, but they needed to map his entire network before making any arrests. If they arrested Pendleton too early, the syndicate would scatter. The 6,200 blank Social Security cards would disappear. The evidence would vanish. They needed to let the shipment through. Jenkins made the call. The CBP would seize the 24th pallet, but they would replace it with a pallet of cheap fabric. They would install a covert GPS tracking device inside the custom-milled steel plates. They would let the Freightliner Cascadia proceed to its final destination. The truck was released at 4 p.m. on November 8th. It drove north toward Phoenix. The GPS tracker showed the truck arriving at a warehouse on West Van Buren Street in Phoenix at 8:30 p.m. The warehouse was leased by another shell company, Sonoran Textile Imports. For the next 14 months, Joint Task Force Glasshouse conducted relentless surveillance. They used passive surveillance teams, pole cameras, and undercover vehicles. They mapped every vehicle that entered the warehouse. They identified every individual who interacted with Pendleton. The Title III wiretap on Pendleton's burner phone yielded over 9,400 hours of intercepted communications. Voice print analysis confirmed Pendleton's voice on 312 separate calls. The calls revealed a highly structured hierarchy. Pendleton was at the top. Below him were regional coordinators in Los Angeles, Houston, and Las Vegas. Below the coordinators were the street-level couriers who picked up the bulk cash and deposited it into the shell company accounts. By October 2027, the task force had mapped the entire network. They had identified 83 individuals involved in the conspiracy. They had identified 41 specific locations, including warehouses, stash houses, and financial centers across Arizona, California, Texas, and Nevada. But the investigation hit a major snag. In late September, an ICE deportation operation in Tucson accidentally picked up one of Pendleton's low-level couriers. The courier's phone, which was linked to the network, was seized. The task force panicked. If the courier realized the scope of the federal investigation, or if word got back to Pendleton that federal heat was closing in, the entire 14-month operation would collapse overnight. Jenkins and Castillo had to work fast. They coordinated with ICE to hold the courier on an unrelated minor state charge, effectively burying him in the local county jail under an alias. It bought them 3 weeks. They had to move now. The common assumption in federal law enforcement is that these sprawling financial networks are impossible to fully dismantle because the kingpins insulate themselves with layers of intermediaries. But the evidence in this case tells a different story. Pendleton was obsessed with micromanaging the logistics. He personally signed off on every single shipment. He kept encrypted ledgers on a physical server inside his Scottsdale mansion. His need for absolute control was the structural weakness that brought the whole empire down. What do you think? Did the system fail the 6,200 victims whose identities were stolen? Or was this just an unavoidable consequence of the modern digital economy? On November 12, 2027, the Attorney General signed 83 federal arrest warrants. The Department of Justice unsealed a 214-page indictment. The indictment charged the 83 defendants with violations of 18 U.S.C. 1956, money laundering, 18 U.S.C. 1028, identity fraud, and RICO statutes. The raid was set for Wednesday, November 17th, 2027. 14 SWAT teams from the FBI, HSI, and the Arizona Department of Public Safety staged at 3 separate forward operating bases. The operational codename was Phase 3. Wednesday, 4:30 a.m. Phoenix, Arizona.14 SWAT teams moved simultaneously. The tactical plan was synchronized to the second. At exactly 4:59 a.m., the power grids to the target locations were cut by undercover utility teams disguised as local electrical workers. At 5 a.m., the breach began. Team Alpha, an 8-man element equipped with a Lenco Bearcat armored vehicle, approached Pendleton's mansion in Scottsdale. The Bearcat smashed through the heavy wrought iron security gate without slowing down. The team dismounted. 2 agents deployed a battering ram to breach the solid oak front door. 2 flashbang grenades were deployed into the main foyer. Inside the mansion, Pendleton was asleep in a reinforced safe room on the 2nd floor. The safe room door was constructed of ballistic steel and required a hydraulic breaching tool to open. Team Bravo, the tactical entry team assigned to the 2nd floor, used a portable hydraulic ram to pry the door open in under 90 seconds. Pendleton's 2-man private security detail, armed with Glock 19 pistols, attempted to engage the Alpha team in the foyer. A brief, intense firefight erupted. 847 rounds were expended between the target security detail and the combined assault element. The security detail was neutralized. No federal agents were injured. As the smoke cleared in the foyer, Team Bravo breached the safe room. Pendleton was found hiding behind a false wall panel, holding a physical laptop. FBI! Drop the laptop and raise your hands slowly. Pendleton froze. He looked at the tactical agents, their rifles equipped with weapon-mounted lights blinding him. He slowly lowered the laptop. You are under federal arrest. Agents moved in, placed him in flex cuffs, and escorted him out of the mansion. The entire operation at the Scottsdale residence lasted 14 minutes. Simultaneously, across 3 states, 41 locations were breached. In Phoenix, teams hit the warehouse on West Van Buren Street. In Los Angeles, HSI teams hit a luxury apartment in Century City. In Houston, FBI teams hit a stash house in the Galleria district. In Las Vegas, task force officers hit a casino counting room that Pendleton had compromised. 38 minutes. That is how long the entire operation lasted. By 5:38 a.m., 41 locations were under federal control. 83 people were in zip cuffs. 2 of them still wore their casino dealer uniforms. The evidence recovery teams moved in. At the Scottsdale mansion, agents found the encrypted server. They found $4.2 million in bulk cash, shrink-wrapped and hidden inside the walls of the home gym. They found 14,000 additional blank Social Security cards. They found the physical ledgers detailing every transaction, every shell company, and every fictitious employee. At the Phoenix warehouse, agents found an industrial printing press. They found 400 computers loaded with the synthetic identity software. They found boxes of holographic overlay sheets. The scale of the operation was staggering. During the processing of the Phoenix warehouse, a female HSI agent lowered her rifle and knelt to speak to a young woman found hiding in a back room. The woman was a victim of labor trafficking, forced to operate the printing press. The agent spoke to her quietly in Spanish, wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders, and escorted her to a humanitarian processing tent set up outside. It was a brief moment of humanity in the middle of a massive tactical operation. The press conference was held at 10 a.m. at the Sandra Day O'Connor United States Courthouse in Phoenix. The United States Attorney for the District of Arizona stood behind a table covered with the seized evidence: 6,200 blank Social Security cards, $4.2 million in cash, 14,000 forged driver's licenses. The media frenzy was immediate. The scale of the fraud, the violence of the raid, and the sheer volume of seized currency made national headlines. But the real story was in the documents. The trial began on March 14th, 2028, at the federal courthouse in Phoenix. Pendleton's defense team, a group of high-priced white-collar attorneys from Los Angeles, argued that their client was a misunderstood financial consultant who had been coerced by cartel threats. They claimed Pendleton was a victim himself, forced to launder money under the threat of violence against his family. The prosecution, led by Assistant United States Attorney Elena Rostova, dismantled this narrative methodically. Rostova presented the encrypted server logs. She presented the Title III wiretap audio, with Pendleton's voice clearly authorizing shipments and discussing bulk cash pickups. She presented the physical ledgers, which showed Pendleton skimming 12% of the laundered funds for his own personal profit. She presented the forensic biometrics linking Pendleton to the warehouse and the printing press. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. On April 2nd, 2028, Arthur Pendleton was found guilty on all counts. He was convicted of 18 U.S.C. 1956, money laundering, 18 U.S.C. 1028, identity fraud, and RICO conspiracy. United States District Judge David Campbell pronounced sentencing. Pendleton received 25 years in federal prison to be served consecutively, followed by 5 years of supervised release. No parole. He was remanded to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, known as ADX Florence. The other 82 defendants received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years, depending on their level of involvement in the conspiracy. The shell companies were dissolved. $112 million in assets were forfeited to the United States government. Honestly, we think Pendleton got off easy. 25 years in ADX, Florence sounds like a long time, but when you weaponize the identities of 6,200 Americans and help cartels clean $112 million, 25 years feels like a rounding error. We'll say what most won't. The sentencing guidelines for massive white-collar financial crimes simply do not reflect the scale of the human damage. The aftermath of Operation Glasshouse extended far beyond the courtroom. The encrypted server and physical ledgers revealed Pendleton's client list. The syndicate had been laundering money for foreign oligarchs, corrupt CEOs, and foreign politicians, not just cartels. The financial trail led to accounts in Cyprus, the Cayman Islands, and Panama. The Secret Service and the FBI forwarded the international leads to Interpol. Red notices were issued for 14 foreign nationals connected to the syndicate. Today, those names are inside Interpol case files. They are not yet in handcuffs. The 6,200 blank social security cards were destroyed. The 1,400 victims whose identities had been stolen were notified by the IRS and the Social Security Administration. A federal trust fund was established using the forfeited assets to provide credit monitoring and identity restoration services for the victims. One detail that stuck with me through this entire case file is just how close it came to never being discovered. If Officer Vega had been tired, if the scale had been slightly miscalibrated, or if the 24th pallet had been hidden in the middle of the truck instead of at the back, the shipment would have passed. 6,200 stolen identities would have entered the system. The $112 million empire would have continued to grow. If you've ever checked your bank statement and found a charge you didn't recognize, imagine that times 10,000. Now imagine the federal government telling you that your identity was used to launder cartel money. What would you have done at 5 a.m. with a 800-pound discrepancy and a truck full of cheap fabric? One discrepancy on one manifest unspooled a 14-month federal investigation. Every container at every port in this country is a number on a form, waiting for someone to check the math. If you want to keep walking through federal case files like this one, the way the agents themselves walked through them, subscribe to FBI Documents, and tell us in the comments which unsolved case you want us to open next. Case closed.